Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Before we begin this episode, a quick note. Podcast Portugal does not endorse or agree with all of the views expressed by today's guest, Afonso Gonçalves, from Reconquista. Some of his positions are controversial and may be challenging for many listeners. However, we believe that free speech is paramount and that ideas should be heard, questioned, and ultimately judged on their own merits. This conversation is part of an ongoing series where we welcome voices from across the political spectrum. In future episodes, we will invite representatives from the far left, the political centre, to provide balance and to challenge the perspectives shared here. In particular, because Mr. Gonçalves remarks on homosexuality, we also plan to feature a leading voice from the LGBTQ plus community to ensure those views are properly addressed. We ask you to listen with an open mind, and we encourage healthy, respectful debate around the ideas discussed.
Makes me want to build a fusion reactor, starting just with the basics wage, connecting.
This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. I would like to have a little bit of an opening statement today for this interview. Podcast Portugal is about free speech, the right to express opinions, and the necessity of understanding different views even when we disagree. Afonso, your movement and ideas are highly controversial, and this interview aims to explore them candidly. Your views on women's roles and rights as voiced publicly reflect a strong Catholic traditionalism. You have stated women don't need to have university education, but should focus on childbearing and various other suggested restrictions. How do you justify these views in a modern democratic Portugal? Or is this messaging from your opponents to undermine your proposition?
Great question. Thank you so much, Justin, for your invitation. And I agree with you. Free speech is really the cornerstone of not only democracy, but also civilization, because without it, we can't come to the truth. So I think we should use free speech as a tool, not only to have comfortable discussions, but also to come to the truth, or at least as closer as we can get to the truth. So regarding your question, it's a very interesting one that I often get misunderstood on, or misquoted on, or misinterpreted on. And I think it's really important to say and use this opportunity to say that my position comes exactly from the standpoint that you described. I'm a traditional Catholic. I believe in the dogmas of the church, and I believe in the traditional teachings of the church. Therefore, my position is not so much that women shouldn't have access to an education, because I believe that in certain contexts, or at least speaking in abstract, there is no inherent problem with them having access to education. So my point is not so much that. My point and my argument is that a society that highlights, promotes, and emphasizes a woman's higher education, whilst simultaneously rejecting or not promoting the childbearing fundamental capacity of a woman and the role of the woman in the family and in the household, is deeply inherently a society that's sick. It's a society that's spiritually sick, where women are highlighted and promoted for having an education, and that's not necessarily negative, as I said, because it could be put to a good purpose and a good use, but they are actively disenfranchised and actively demotivated from pursuing their main role, which I think this isn't, let's say, a controversial thing to say. This used to be normal even 15 years ago. A woman's main role is not to be a lawyer, although that's all well and good. It's not to be a doctor or an actress. It is to be a mother. After all, that's the basis and the cornerstone of society. So my criticism is not so much at the women for pursuing a higher education, because I think that's that comes from the human spirit of looking for development and improvement and knowledge. My criticism is more aimed at society, a society and a culture that promotes more women's education and women's professions than their absolutely key role, which is their main role, and which is the one in which they will be more both satisfied and fulfilled, which is to be a mother and to dedicate to the family. So that's my point on that.
I can see that point, and I can agree with that point. My own wife Rita, she's not working and basically wanted to devote all of her time to raising Martim and giving him as much love and as much of herself as possible. And it's a full-time job. You cannot, if you decide to have a child, if you don't necessarily have as much family support as you need, it's a full-time role. And if you're going to do it properly, it's very difficult to balance a career and with raising a child. So I can see that point. I can see that point.
For sure, I agree, and I applaud all the women that take the decisions to dedicate to their families, like your wife did. So it's a great thing to see and a great thing to do.
Yeah, and I think really in the end of the day, I think we'd probably all agree it should be the woman's choice, but it should be also she should be able to choose if she wants to take a career or if she decides that she wants to devote much of her time to child raising. I think as a culture, as a society, we should help support that. I think everybody would probably agree with that. Now, there is another big question here because of your Catholic traditionalism, regarding homosexuality. You have been described as saying that it's actually a disease. Given Portugal's liberal laws supporting LGBTQ plus, I think there is something at the end of there, rights, how do you reconcile your stance with the country's legal and social framework on this question?
Yes, that's a very well put question. Well, I believe that we should be free and allowed to express our opinions on any matter, even independently of the social and legal framework. And if there comes a point where the social and legal framework is at such odds with the truth that we are forced to lie, I would still rather say the truth and be at odds with the social and legal framework than be at odds with God, because that's really what it comes down to in the end. So I really believe, and I think this is not, let's say, an extraordinary, exotic idea. This is the norm in every religion, in every society, in every civilization, or at least in most civilizations that persisted and endured until it was changed and debated 30 years ago because of the pressure of these homosexual lobby. Homosexuality used to be considered a sin for throughout human history until the 1990s. And now it's seen not as a sin and as a sickness, it's seen as something that's totally normal. And not only is it totally normal, it's actually applaudable, and it's actually something that should be actively promoted. So I think that's a grave mistake, and it's really a deturpation of the truth. Homosexuality is inherently, by its very meaning and by its very act, it is inherently disordered, and it's inherently against the natural order of life and of nature. Two people of the same sex should not be having sexual relations, because the purpose of sexual relations is the main purpose, at least, is to reproduce. So if you're rejecting that purpose by having sex with someone that you can't reproduce with of the same sex, you're actively turning on its head the purpose of this act. And therefore, this is the definition of sin in religious terms, and any religion agrees on that.
Okay. And how would you? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt there. How would you
Yeah.
position, for example, gay couples adopting a child? Say a child is in the social services, is being raised in an institution, and a couple can a same-sex couple can offer that child a loving home. What would be your opinion on that? I know we're talking about details here.
No, but it's important to talk about the details. I think that the homosexual, I don't even call them couples because they're well, you could call them couples, but not they're never married because it's not marriage by definition. But homosexuals should never be allowed to adopt children. Um, First of all, because it's not a conducive environment to raise a child in. It's not a normal, healthy environment to raise a child in. I mean, even homosexuality, and I'm not saying every single homosexual, but I'm saying that most pedophiles are actually homosexuals. So the LGBTQ community, or whatever you want to call them, is actually overrepresented in pedophilia. So that's not, let's say, I don't want to roll the dice with the future of these children, raising them in dysfunctional homes just for the sake of extremist lobbies' satisfaction. Uh, and furthermore, I believe that honestly, there's a lot of families. So I mean, women and men. There's a lot of families that want to adopt and that are ready and willing to adopt. So I've gotten a lot of messages from these types of families saying they couldn't adopt for some specific bureaucratic reason, but then they see the normalization of adoption by same-sex, uh, in quotas, couples. So really, families should be able to adopt children, and I mean, there's more than enough families to go around
Yeah,
that
I
are
think
able and should be able to adopt children.
I think my opinion is a little bit shelved on that one because I thoroughly believe if a parents can give love to a child, I think that is a good starting point. And I there is the question, you raise the issue about pedophilia and the possibility of homosexuals being a large majority of pedophilia advocates, but that could also be said by the Catholic Church in recent light that has been a lot of problems in that term. So not any group is perfect, correct?
No, for sure. Not any group is perfect. Although I would, let's say, just add a paragraph here by saying that the Catholic priests, who unfortunately have been related with sexual abuse or have been pedophiles in the past, they are homosexuals as well. So they are, let's say, a part of that LGBTQ community. So it's not in the virtue of them being priests that they become pedophiles. I mean, it's more in light of their homosexuality that they are.
Okay.
Engaging in these types of activities. And I'm sure there's different examples that could prove the opposite point. But I believe if we look at the data and if we study the numbers, it's really a huge minority. I mean, a
What?
huge minority of Catholic priests who have ever been condemned of pedophilia.
Okay. Do
If it,
Catholic priests get married?
Catholic priests don't get married, no.
Okay, and I'm just wondering how that plays a part in the community or the Catholic community when you have a key figure of the church and in the role of your life in the Catholic life who has no experience of marriage or sex or um, how does that how do you cope with that sort of concept?
Well, it's interesting. Without going into the, let's say, theological details
Mm,
about it, well, I also have to mention that I'm not, let's say, the most versed on those details, but I could go into them. But without going into them, I will say that it's just the norm, and we see it normally that the Catholic priests don't get married. They have no offspring. They have no kids, and I think that is positive because, and also I believe that's one of the main reasons for the endurance of the Catholic Church and its 2,000-year survival and prosperity as an institution, that they have been able, or we as the Church, we have been able to, let's say, gather the most disciplined, and of course there's examples of the opposite, but in general, we've been able to gather the most disciplined, the most ascetic and abstinent members of society that are able to fully, spiritually, physically, and in with their whole integrity commit to the cause of spiritual guidance of a community. So
Yeah.
I think that should be kept. In my opinion, that's one of the main reasons for the survival of the church.
Okay.
And in the day that we start to question that, and maybe in the future even abolish that, that would be the day where the Catholic Church dies, because that's the whole basis of how we get.
I think I agree with you. I definitely think it's a beautiful message there that, you know, if you have that calling, again, it's about choice. If you have that calling
Right.
and you feel like you want to go on a spiritual journey, I think that should be encouraged. And I think as a culture and as a society, we need to protect that.
Totally.
Ironically, you know, I was thinking about this morning. It could be argued that a lot of your social views are more aligned with authoritarian religious laws like Sharia than with Western democratic values. How would you respond to those comparisons?
Yeah, I would respond that democracy is not incompatible with authoritarianism. I mean, every day you see supposed quote unquote Western liberal democracies implementing authoritarian laws or censoring speech they don't agree with,
Mm-hmm.
or being out and right totalitarian in reaction to the growing wave of dissidentism in Western society. So they implement constantly, whilst at the same time claiming to defend and uphold free speech, diversity of opinion, democratic values. They are constantly censoring and implementing authoritarian attitudes. I mean, even myself, I get constantly persecuted by the state
Yeah,
and its
we're gonna get to
political
that.
forces.
We're gonna get to
Yeah,
that question. We're gonna
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about
So I'll save
those
it.
recent
I'll
events
save
for
it.
sure.
I'll save it for
Yeah.
later. Yeah, no problem.
Your
So
your group Reconquista sort of frames immigration from non-European countries as a threat to the Portuguese identity and culture.
right.
And you call for a mass deportation or at least heavy regularization of and a return to ethnically defined Portuguese. My question is, how do you respond to those accusations that this is rhetoric borders on racism and white supremacy? And I'd really like to understand what your vision is of the Portuguese identity, and you know, what is the Portuguese ethnic identity?
Great question. So I believe that this vision my position on these matters could be described as racist or white supremacist, but the left and the social, institutional, mediatic apparatus, they will always describe everything they don't agree with as racist.
Well, Portuguese
So
aren't really white, really, are they? If you were to look at it I would imagine if you go to some areas of where they have white supremacists, they would consider Portuguese as non-white.
yes, yes, but
So it's kind
that
of a
is
ridiculous accusation, really, in many
yeah,
respects.
yeah, that's a ridiculous accusation. Although that the Portuguese are white because all the European peoples from every country descend from a common lineage of ancestry. So we
Okay.
can define
So
specifically and scientifically the Portuguese people as white Europeans. Of course, living in the south and having different ethnicity characteristics, we have slightly darker skin than, for example, an English person or a German, or an Anglo-Saxon in general. So it's just differences in the specific tonality of the skin. But ethnicity is not only skin tonality; it's much deeper than that. It's biology. It's other aspects of your physiognomy.
history, I
But
guess.
I would say that the main point here is that the regime, the system will always characterize any vision they don't agree with as some mean, demeaning term. In
Okay.
this case, it's racism or white supremacism, but it's ridiculous accusations. My position is that the Portuguese are a specific ethnicity, a specific ethno-cultural group, and that group should be protected because if we want to defend, and I do, a diverse world, with multiple cultures and groups,
Exactly.
then we
Yeah, good
shouldn't
point.
mix them all together. We should make sure they have their own space to grow and develop. And I believe that for Portugal, as I believe that for any other country and specific culture.
Interesting. I probably agree with that actually, because we should all have as it's a big earth, and I think if we all just have one culture, one universal culture, it'd be a sad day. From my own personal perspective, like one of the reasons I host Podcast Portugal, and it's in English, is to try to express the Portuguese identity, or at least from the guests, and to express the Portuguese identity and culture to many English speakers who are either living in outside of Portugal or who are indeed in Portugal, and just to try to respect that culture and to try to understand what it means to be Portuguese and what it means to be, as somebody like me who is essentially an immigrant who has a Portuguese partner and a Portuguese son, what it means to me to fully understand where I'm living, and we moved to the Alentejo simply because it is more Portuguese, which is strange for an English person to say, but I moved to this country for a reason. It wasn't just because of the sunshine, and swimming pools, and barbecues, and great food, and beautiful people. It was simply because I really respected the family values of Portugal. It's not necessarily all about the financial gain. There is a really good solid base of family values here that I felt, and I also felt that I can go over to my neighbor and I can ask them if they need my help, and my neighbor would come over to me. And I think for me personally, that is something that needs to be very protected. So I can understand you and your point here that you want to protect your neighbors, you want to protect your history, you want to protect your forefathers and what they built here. I can fully understand that. But where is the threat coming from?
That's a great question, and also to engage with your points there. I think this is a beautiful way to approach immigration that should be controlled in restricted numbers, legal, but also I believe my model of immigration emphasizes and highlights that most of our immigration, at least 85 or 90% of our immigration, should come from European countries, because not only do we share the same ethnic and cultural backgrounds, although it's not exactly the same, but it's very similar, we can easily assimilate into the native culture of a host country. For example, if Portuguese people go and live abroad in the UK or in Germany, for example, they easily assimilate fully into the host country's culture and way of life. Just like you described there, you are coming to Portugal because you love the culture, you love the environment, you love the people, and you want to fully assimilate into the values and live those values. I believe that 90, if not 95 or 99% of extra European immigration doesn't come to Portugal with that frame of mind, with that mentality. They come to Portugal like you rejected as your reason for coming to Portugal. They come only and purely for financial gain and financial reasons, because it will benefit them personally and financially. They don't come with this open spirit of assimilating into the country. So I think this is a really, you put it perfectly there, a really good way of separating these two types of immigration.
And
So getting, yeah,
and
please
sorry,
go ahead.
there is let me play devil's advocate here. There is a justification, particularly in the area that I live. I live amongst the big olive farms and the big producers, the farmers here, the almonds. There is a requirement here for labor. These businesses, which contribute a hell of a lot to the Portuguese economy, they need to have labor. Now, much of the local Portuguese, if you go around many of the Alentejo villages here, many of the youngsters have left to live in the bigger cities, to go to university and to make careers in things other than picking almonds. So how do we address that problem? How do we attract Portuguese or Europeans back into the countryside here, because the jobs are fantastic. I mean, they're hard work. It's in the sun, but the salary is good. But these jobs are only done now by people from sub-Indian continent or and other areas like this who seem to be prepared to do the work for the job. Is it almost kind of like a modern day slavery we're seeing here?
Yeah, totally, totally. The current immigration model keeps us with this economic system that is a modern day slavery, totally. And it prevents the economy from developing because there's no incentive for the owners of these companies to develop and to automate because the wages that they pay, and I have to disagree when you say that the wages are good. The wages are low. I mean, they're not the worst of the worst, but they're low wages, and it keeps them from developing and automating their businesses because it doesn't benefit them in the long run because the wages they pay are so low. So the benefit of development is not there. And I believe that we should have thought about these years ago, and so that there's no excuse to say that now we need immigrants suddenly because we need these jobs to be done. When this problem could have been foreseen years ago, and the same regime that is now trying to solve it by importing mass hordes of immigrants into the countryside and into Portugal as a whole, this same regime knew that this trend was coming and did nothing to prevent it. So in my opinion, they don't want to solve it. They wanted this problem to happen
You think
long
you
ago
think
in
they're
order
importing
to
votes?
give this fake solution.
They're
Importing votes
yeah,
as well,
could
and
possibly.
keeping this economic model based on exactly like you said, a modern age slavery. And Portuguese people want to work. They're hardworking. They go to different European countries to do these jobs that Indian people are coming here to do. I believe that we should reduce the taxes to the companies, reduce a lot of bureaucracies, and give them incentives for hiring Portuguese people. In this
Or
way, the
invest in
Portuguese people
mechanization.
wouldn't have to leave.
Yeah,
They wouldn't have to live. They could stay. Sorry?
or create more liquidity and funding so that the companies here can invest in more mechanization, and then have
Yes,
Portuguese running
that's a
this
good
as a
point as well.
skilled operators of these machines. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point as well. But even if we were to keep this model that doesn't work, and I agree with you, we should automate and develop. But even if we were to keep this model, we should still reduce a lot of taxes and bureaucracies to companies so they could actually hire Portuguese people and don't depend only on immigrants. To honestly, if your company depends on a modern day slavery type of work, your company shouldn't exist anyways because that's not legitimate.
Mm. It's kind of scary. I mean, because if you imagine the original slavery, people were working for food and lodging, and it's not too different from it now. Okay, they get a little bit of money, they get some euros, but yeah, okay, so we can leave that point behind. Afonso, you were arrested recently following protests and activism related to your nationalist agenda. Can you explain the circumstances of your arrest, and do you believe it was justified or was it politically motivated?
No, it's never been justified. I've been arrested multiple times at very peaceful and totally legal events that I have conducted and promoted. And the reasons
Did you get the right license is the question, probably, right? Are you supposed to submit a license to give you the permission to run an event like this, or is that
in Portugal, you need a license for everything. It's still this regime was built on rejecting the corporatist regime of Salazar, but I think the corporatist traits are still there because you need a license for everything. You need to apply for everything. You need to pay for everything. But I mean, it's ridiculous. You should not have to get a license in order, and you don't really have to get a license to do a debate in public. I mean, you are just interacting with people, speaking with them. So at this recent event, I did change my mind in front of the most left-wing university of Portugal, and you could see the rage of these beings. I think they don't qualify as persons because of their attitude. These beings are so enraged at me speaking my point and stating my positions and wanting to peacefully and safely debate. They're so enraged at it that they even called. Take a look at this information. They called the urgency services. They didn't even call the police. It was so grave that a man was standing in front of that university speaking his mind. I mean, that's the spirit of universities, different opinions.
Yeah.
And it's so grave that they called emergency services, not the police. And that's why then these old people have a lack of assistance in the emergency services, because leftists, mostly leftist liberal young women, are so emotionally attacked by some men speaking his voice that they call the emergency services in order to get me out of there, as if they have that right. So I was, let's say, impeded by the police, which is a totally illegal attitude and approach. I've been even messaged by a lot of police guards who anonymously told me that this approach by the police was illegal. So
Okay.
I know that this was a wrong approach by the police, but it has happened to me many times.
What was the justification? What did they actually say to you? Did they say, okay, you're
They
not
said,
allowed to speak here with the speakers, or, what was the
no,
actual...
they said that it was an illegal demonstration because I needed to, supposedly, I needed to tell them beforehand that I was going to do a demonstration. However, this
Okay.
is not a demonstration, it's just a conversation in public. I'm just speaking with people. And I mean, the way you can tell that their problem is not with the form of my activity, but with the content of my activity, is that people do this every day. I mean, if you go around Lisbon or Porto, there's people singing in the street, there's people speaking loud in the street, there's people playing piano in the street. So if I went there with the same microphone, the same table, the same sound system, and I said, "Have a lovely day, everyone. Please go home safe. I love you all so much," they would not impede me. They would not stop me from doing that. Thus, they are proving that the problem is not what I'm doing, but the content of what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
that's, for me, political persecution, put very simply.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we can both agree on very, very strongly. I'm really of the opinion that you should be able to have free speech. If somebody takes such offense to your speech, I think that they need to look at themselves, because, you can agree, you can disagree, that's part of, as we said earlier, that's part of being in a democracy. And the only way that we can move forward is when everybody's listened to, opinions are understood, both from the left and the right, and in some way we can keep moving forward. I've sort of do think that in recent years that the political spectrum has shifted so far left that it's moved people like Chega, or maybe slightly even further right. It's moved so far left that it's left you out further right. Do you know what I mean? If you looked at your political party and
I totally
your
agree, yes.
values 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago, you would be completely, possibly
Normal,
just
just normal.
conservative,
Yeah.
slightly right of center. But now I think it's shifted so far left.
Yeah,
Again.
exactly. I mean, we were speaking, and I don't want to, let's say, bring up this debate again, but we were speaking about the homosexual aspect before. And just 16, 17, I think 2008 or 2009, so 16, 17 years ago, the parliament voted almost unanimously, at least the parties of the center and the center right, they voted unanimously against homosexual so-called marriage. Nowadays, even the further right-wing party, the most right-wing party of them all, Chega, they would not even dare touch this subject, let alone vote against it. So this can really show you the downhill, slippery slope that we've been on. And also why our ideas are not extreme, because our ideas are the same as our fathers, grandfathers, grand-grandfathers. The extremeness here is of the people that are trying to erase and destroy all of the values that we uphold. That's the extreme position. Defending them is not extreme, it's just normality.
I think it's important for all factors to be having a voice. And where do you think this radical extreme left comes from? Do you think it's pervading the social media systems, and do you think there is influences from TikTok and possibly Chinese influence in promoting this sort of leftist vision of the world? Are we getting too conspiratorial here?
I don't think we are. I think that there is a strong argument to be made there. the Chinese, even the Russians. I hate this disingenuous opinion of some people on the right that somehow the Chinese have our best interests at heart or the Russians have our best interests at heart. They have political interests, and our political interests are not, at least in this moment in time, the same as theirs. So they are actively in different ways trying to undermine our society. I would just add to that even the USA, at least until recently, was heavily financing leftist projects, leftist institutions, leftist studies in academia, leftist academics and teachers through various financing programs that thankfully and rightly so, Donald Trump has ended. So even the USA is not, let's say, without blame in these neo-Marxist liberal project that they are implementing, and they're doing it through universities, through the media, but mostly through a quasi-religious worldview that is almost like a religion with its own priests, with its own heresies, with its own inquisitors, and that, in my view, is the religion of anti-identitarianism or anti-nationalism. The enemy number one and the public enemy number one is the one who defends his people the most because of this multicultural view and multicultural system that is heavily bent on rejecting the identitarian, let's say, ideas of its own native people. I mean, 67% of Portuguese people in recent studies are against this model of immigration and they want less immigrants in Portugal. There is no party actively advocating, not even Chega, for less immigrants because less immigrants means stopping immigration, halting it totally, putting an indefinite moratorium on it, and starting mass deportations. So no party is actually defending what people actually genuinely want, and that's worrying for any person with a minimum democratic spirit.
I was recently talking to an economist, and one of the justifications I think the government has for immigration is the idea of we need to generate more population to pay the taxes and to pay the pensions of an elderly of a generation that are getting much older and require pensions and a national health system and all this kind of thing. So, what in your vision, if we don't have immigration, how do we, of course, with family values, we should be encouraged to have more kids, right? I think that would probably be your idea there, to combat the falling birth rate. It's a European factor. In fact, it's not just Portugal. We need to have a successful economy. I think you need to have more than 2.6 children per family. So let's say 3 children per family would mean we would have a healthy economic growth. What would be your vision if we, and do you think that immigration is purely an economic band-aid for future economic problems, or and what would be your solutions, your vision?
My vision is that we shouldn't, let's say, we shouldn't condition our long-term future for our short-term benefit. I mean, the whole social security system is based on a Ponzi scheme, which doesn't really work anyways, and is destined to fail eventually. So, as we spoke about before, I think the priority should be to invest in automation, invest in real development, and that will bring the real added value that will actually contribute to a better economy. The current immigration model we have is contributing to a lower GDP per capita because of its low qualifications of work, low skilled labor. So it's lowering the GDP per capita. And also the immigrants that we have mostly nowadays in Portugal, most of our immigration comes from either African, South American, or Indian and Pakistani and Bangladesh backgrounds. And this type of immigration, many studies have correlated it with financial loss. So, in simple terms, they take in more through different investments that are necessary to integrate and get these people to work and get them to be safe, etc. They take up more than they actually contribute. So, it's actually net negative for the economy. So, we should focus on real development, real automation, uh, lowering taxes, improving the economy through that way, and not, as we said before.
If you haven't already switched to Revolut, now is the perfect time. I use Revolut Personal to manage my everyday money, spending, saving, sending across borders. You can hold over 30 currencies, transfer internationally at great rates, and even earn daily interest on your savings. It's smart, fast, and used by more than 60 million people worldwide. And if you run a business, Revolut has even more powerful solutions. Revolut Business gives you a global account built for growth, multi-currency accounts, team cards, spending controls, international transfers, and easy ways to get paid. It's streamlined, affordable, and designed to scale with your business. Here's the best part. Sign up for Revolut Personal with my link below and join me on one of the most advanced money apps available. And if you're a founder or a business owner, use my Revolut Business referral link and get your first month with no subscription fees. Whether it's for your personal finances or your business, Revolut has you covered, all in one place.
Afonso, looking ahead, what are your goals for your movement politically and socially within Portugal? We talked a little bit about the economic ideals and mechanization and the growth of the family and the reduction of uncontrolled immigration. What else do you think you could add to that for your movement and for Portugal?
Our main objective is to promote remigration as an alternative model of immigration to the current model we have.
Okay, that's returning diaspora, the Portuguese diaspora, to encourage them to return to Portugal.
Yes, that's both that as well as a set of overall policies aimed at promoting the self-removal of immigrants back to their own native lands through different judicial, fiscal, economic, social, cultural policies that will incentivize and promote a lot of immigrants according to a lot of different criteria. We don't have the time to go into now to eventually return to their home nations, mostly extra-European immigration to return to their home nations. So remigration is really an alternative model of immigration to the current model we have. And that's our main core idea that we try to get across to people, that we try to influence the debate with. And our three goals are to influence the cultural landscape. We are doing that very successfully. To influence the youth. We are also doing that successfully. And as a third goal, to influence the political parties and their proposals. And I think we are also doing that with relative success. So that's our three main targets. And we want, we want to develop our movement the most we can and really reach the youth of Portugal as best as possible, giving them a call to action and a purpose for their to channel their let's say oppositions to this way of life and to this system as best as they can. So we want also to the movement has also this cultural function and social function of helping the youth to achieve their utmost potential by living and being in a way that's totally against what this system wants them to be like and to behave like. The system wants them to be dull, insecure, unmotivated, little wage slaves, and we want them to be free, independent thinking, and strong. And that's really the biggest cry of revolution, let's say, that we could shout back at this hateful and really extremist system.
Okay. No, I think basically we all have the same values. We all have the same goals. We want to make Portugal. We want to make Europe, and we want to make the world a better place for our children and for our children's children. And we might not all agree on the different methods and the different policies, but I think we all have an opinion. We all must voice an opinion. We must be strong in our opinions, and I think then that'll lead us to a more unified approach
I do worry sometimes that the media, for whatever reason, seems to want to create the division because of opposing views and not necessarily look for the commonality which binds our views. I think sometimes they're quite happy to keep pushing you further and further out on the right. And indeed, on the opposite scale of things as well, the media tend to quite enjoy pushing the leftists further and further and further to the extreme left in their representation in the media. And then we have probably the majority of people, you may disagree, but probably the majority of the people would agree with some things you say and maybe disagree with some things. They might agree with some values of the left, like a health system or whatever, an education system for all. But they might actually sit a little bit in the middle, dancing one foot in either spectrum of left or right. And I think this is why it's important to have a fair and open debate from both sides, even from the middle, from the center. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that most people are, let's say, open to a free and open debate, and they have this willingness to accept different opinions from both sides. And I think normally nowadays what you see on the right is that we are also open to different ideas in terms of economic policy, in terms of fiscal policy, and you see this even in Portuguese Parliament, that the right-wing parties, they will approve proposals from the left-wing parties out of a genuine belief that that's a positive proposal, but the left-wing parties will always outright reject the right-wing proposals just because they are coming from the right wing. So I think this rejection of debate, this rejection of dialogue comes from the left, and we should not overlook that, because that's really what the left is about nowadays. And I'm not saying left-wing individuals, but the left-wing as a whole, as a social cultural movement, they reject really debate, and they're against free speech. And we see that, I believe, every day nowadays, even more and more.
Well, I could see that. That was very evident in when you were giving your talk outside of the university there. The lady was literally just shouting you down. You were offering her and another gentleman the microphone to talk. And then, but she was just shouting you down, threatening. And I feel that is, in my opinion, what really motivated me to be able to talk to you more, because I think this whole thing where different opinions are shouted down and demonized is, exactly what we keep talking about. You may not disagree, but you must let people talk, and you must allow the debate to continue, because this is the only way we move forward. And Afonso, on that note, I would like to thank you for your time. I know you're extremely busy, especially at the moment with, fighting the cause. And I wish you, on a personal level, the best of luck. Afonso, thank you so much for your time. It's been really appreciated. I know you're very busy with things that are going on in the events at the moment, in the media, etc., the circus. And I really appreciate your time. On a personal level, I wish you all the best for the future, and thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much, Justin. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it, and I look forward to listening to it afterwards.
We're not all going to agree on everything, like I've said many times this podcast. Okay, so this is Justin West from Podcast Portugal, signing out. Planning a trip to Portugal? Whether you're exploring Lisbon, surfing in Ediceto, or road tripping through the Alentejo, staying connected is essential. I use Airalo every time I travel, even on some surfboat trips, adventures to the Maldives. So when we connected to collaborate, I was really genuinely happy. Airalo's eSIMs give you instant data the moment you land in a foreign country. No queues, no physical SIM cards, just seamless, reliable coverage. Travel smarter, stay connected, download Airalo before your next adventure. Follow this link in the show notes to get connected today.
I need to concentrate. Stop this train of thoughts, or I will be crashing on a couch. Won't have much to grouch about. wage, connecting poles and energy. Mom says focus on geography, on the things I can learn with that machine. I need some fuel, I need a monster now. I'm the last to come, the cloud. Won't you go start, friend? Don't let it get burned, don't let it get burned, don't let it get all the way downtown with a little bit of luck, a little bit of luck. I'm gonna level up on me. I'm stuck with March, the fellow man. It's keeping me from my romance test in history, the mystery of the century. Stop the train, I'm getting out. Stop the train, I'm getting out. Stop the train, I'm getting out. Stop the train, I'm getting out of order, out of order, out of order, out. 1, 2, 3, we are living on a rock.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.